One of the things that podcasters rely on for monetizing their shows is sponsored ads. But how does podcast advertising work? And how do you place a sponsored ad on your show? This is what we'll be covering in this episode. In this episode, you will learn some of the basics of podcast advertising. And don't forget to listen till the end when I will share with you 2 platforms which can help you monetize your podcast using sponsored ads and how you can use these ads to increase listenership for your show. Welcome to the Podcasting University. Looking for help on starting your own podcast? Then this is the place to be. We will help you with everything from selecting your topic to promoting and monetizing your podcast in the simplest language possible. Listen to other podcasters who've been through the grind and learn from them as we interview them every week. You can find more details on thepodcastinguniversity.com. Hello and welcome to episode 68 of the Podcasting University. This is your host Dilip. In the last 3 episodes, we spoke extensively about interview podcasts. So if you haven't listened to it, then I would recommend that you do that right away before you start your podcast. And if you have any questions around running an interview podcast, just drop me a message and I'll create an episode around it. Now on to today's topic, podcast advertising. The first question that you would have, and in fact a lot of people would have, is why would somebody want to advertise on a podcast? Podcast is probably the only medium with such high retention rates as 80%. And podcast ads are the best when it comes to response from listeners. Podcasts have most listener engagement, and this engagement also shows up in the ads that are served on podcasts too. In a Nielsen survey, 70% of respondents reported that a podcast ad increased their awareness of a new product or service. Another survey said that about 76% of the listeners acted on podcast ads, which is huge when you look at conversions. Because in conventional media ads, you don't see so many people reacting or responding to advertisement. Now, isn't that enough reason for brands to advertise on podcasts? In this episode, we'll be looking at some of the basics of podcast advertising, which will help you understand how podcast advertising works, and it can also be helpful if you're looking at sponsored ads for your podcast. So let's get started. First thing, how are ads placed in a podcast? Now, when it comes to placing ads on a podcast, it is primarily done in 2 ways. First is dynamic insertion, and the second one is manual insertion, or which we also call as baked-in ads. Dynamic insertion is an automatic way of placing the ads. You can place an ad on all your episodes together in just 1 click, or you can select few episodes, that too in 1 click, and place the ads only in those selected episodes. Now, dynamic insertion works at the hosting provider's end if they have an option of dynamically inserting ads into your podcast. Now, if your host doesn't give you that option of dynamically placing the ads, then you will not be able to do that. But a baked-in ad, on the other hand, is usually manually inserted. Now, this means that the podcaster will have to insert this ad into their episode when he is editing and producing the episode. Now, both these ads have their own pros and cons. One of the major ones in favor of dynamic insertion being control over the duration that the ads are placed for. Now, in a dynamically inserted ad, you have an option of taking off the ad at any time that you want by simply switching it off. So, if for example, you place an ad on your podcast, or you reach an agreement with an advertiser to place an ad on your podcast for only a month, at the end of the month, all that you need to do is just turn the ads off, and the ads go off from all of your episodes and from your podcast. But in a baked-in ad, you don't have that flexibility. The ad, once inserted, stays in the episode for as long as that episode is out there for people to listen to. And if you want to remove that ad, then you will have to manually edit that particular episode and re-upload the audio in order to remove that ad. So that's one of the biggest drawbacks in manual insertion or baked-in ads, and the positives that dynamic insertion has. Now, what are the different type of podcast ads? Now, podcast ads can be of different types, though there is no standard categorization of ads, but depending upon how the ad is placed, podcast ads can be 1. Programmatic ads, 2. Host read ads, or 3. Live read ads. Now, programmatic ads are usually pre-recorded ads that are dynamically inserted into a podcast with the help of an automation or maybe an artificial intelligence. There is no manual intervention involved. You would have heard about Buzzsprout ads, which they've launched very recently. Some of the other podcast hosting providers, like for example, Acast, Spreaker, these podcast hosts also provide for programmatic ad insertion into your episodes, for which they pay you. Now, all of these programmatic ad insertion happens without any manual intervention and is done usually through an automation or an AI. Now, if a podcaster agrees to place these ads on his show, these ads can be automatically placed on the podcast at different points, and that is taken care of by the podcast host itself. But podcast advertising isn't advanced enough that you have a lot of control over which ads to place in your podcast. Though there is some amount of control that you will have in terms of what you want to place and what not. Like for example, if you're not okay with placing explicit ads on your podcast, you can decide not to place such kind of ads. So that's the only control that you might have. But what kind of ads you are placing on your podcast, like for example, specific brands or specific niche that you want to target, this kind of targeting isn't available right now in any of these programmatic ads. We're almost 5 minutes into today's episode, and I'm hoping that you are enjoying the conversation until now. If you are, then please do consider referring this podcast to your friends, your family, and your social media circles. Whoever is interested in getting started a podcast, they'll be able to find a lot of value in this show. So do consider referring the Podcasting University to people who you think will benefit from this information. Now, let's continue with the conversation. Now, host read ads are also scripted ads, but they are not placed programmatically. They are manually inserted into the episode by the podcaster. So how this happens is that the podcast host reads out the scripted ad that is provided by the brand to the host, and then he records it as part of the episode. Now, the advantage of a host read is that it flows naturally with the flow of the episode. It is in the voice of the host, so the audience wouldn't feel interrupted when they are listening to the ad, though there is an ad that is playing. And if it is done well, these kind of ads can have excellent impact on the audience. In comparison to host read ads, live reads ads are a little different, though it is very similar to host read ads. They are little different in the fact that they are not scripted. Now, live read ads are ads that are read out as part of the natural conversation. So the podcast host, what they will do is, in the natural conversation that they are doing in the podcast, they just mention about this specific brand, the advantages, and whatever it is that they would want to talk about from that brand's perspective. They just talk about those aspects and record it as a natural conversation. So there is absolutely no interruption for the audience. The audience will feel as if the conversation is happening as part of the podcast and will never realize that there is an ad that is running in the show. Again, all these 3 types of ads, programmatic ads, host read ads, and live read ads, have their own advantages and disadvantages. But the host read and the live read ads are what can be extremely effective in comparison to the programmatic ads. But the host read and the live read ads involves a lot of additional effort from the podcast host, and hence those kind of ads are always charged higher than the programmatic ads. Now let's move on to ad placement. Now, as a podcaster, you don't want to ruin your listeners' experience, which is something that mindless placement of advertisements can do. And as a listener, you don't want to be interrupted, because you lose the continuity in the thought flow and the experience can be extremely bad. But then, as a podcaster, you also want to make money from your podcast. So how do you place your ads in such a way that it doesn't impact your listener experience and at the same time can make money for you? That is something that a lot of these researches and studies have helped in. Now, based on studies, there are 3 common ad placements that can help with keeping a balance in the listener experience and the ad profitability. Now, these are 1. Pre-roll, 2. Mid-roll, and 3. Post-roll. Now, as the name suggests, these are based on where the specific ad is placed. So pre-roll is placed before the episode starts. Mid-roll is placed towards the middle of the episode, and post-roll is after your episode ends. Now the placement makes it quite evident as to which of these can have the most impact. For example, the pre-roll will be a must listen for listeners because that is the one thing that they hear when they are starting with the episode. But the listener has an option of skipping the ad or even browsing away from the episode. These ads usually are about 30 seconds at the most, not more than that, but these ads aren't as effective. The second one is mid-roll. The mid-roll is the one with the most exposure. Now the probability of the listener browsing away is also minimal because they've already listened to part of the episode and they would want to complete listening to the episode before leaving. So the possibility of them browsing away is very minimal. Now the mid-roll ads are usually the longer ones which run between 45 to 60 seconds and are the most effective. The post-roll is the least effective of the three because this comes at the end of the episode. By that time, the listener has listened to the entire episode, so the probability of people listening to this specific ad is minimal and it is easily skippable. Now these ads are again about 30 seconds long and has the least impact. Now how much you charge for an ad and how much advertisers pay for the ad could also depend upon where you are placing the ads. How you price your ads is something that we'll be discussing in our next episode. But for this episode, I think there is a lot of information that I shared and I don't want to overwhelm you. So I'll keep it at that. Now, on to the two platforms that I spoke about in the beginning. Now, if you're interested in monetizing your podcast with programmatic ads, then you can try out these two platforms and there is a bonus platform that I'll talk about. First one is Audry.io. It's AUDRY, Audry.io. The second one is sponsoredby.io. It's sponsoredby.io. There is another good option which is called as OSA Collective, which is basically an app which again helps you monetize your podcast. But that is on invitation. You might want to check if you can register. If not, you will have to wait for an invitation from them. But these are three platforms that are extremely good and effective when it comes to running ads on your episodes or monetizing your podcast. Now, at the same time, if you want to gain additional exposure for your podcast, because the most number of listeners discover a new podcast through word of mouth. So what better than playing your ad in a podcast, playing your ad for your podcast in another podcast. So you can advertise your podcast on other podcasts in a pre-roll, mid-roll or a post-roll advertisement, or you can even advertise using a host read ad. You will get all of these options on Audry.io. So you can build your audience on Audry.io. So go and try these platforms and do let me know your feedback about these three platforms. I hope you found value in the information that I shared today. If you did, then don't forget to visit thepodcastinguniversity.com. You'll find the show notes, the resources that I mentioned about, the resources that I use in podcasting, and a lot of information on thepodcastinguniversity.com. For the show notes for this specific episode, you can visit thepodcastinguniversity.com/68, where you'll be able to find everything that I spoke about today. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite platform. We are available on pretty much all podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Amazon Prime Music. Pick your favorite podcasting platform, search for Podcasting University or Podcasting Tips. You'll be able to find the Podcasting University there. Do subscribe so that you stay updated with the latest episodes that I come out with. That is all that I have for this episode. If you're new to podcasts and want to start a podcast, then join my free e-course, 10-day e-course on how to get started with your podcast. You'll be able to find the link on thepodcastinguniversity.com. Also in the show notes here, you can go and check the show notes, click the link and join the free 10-day e-course. That's all that I have for this week. I'll be back again the next week with some more podcasting related information. Until then, keep listening to the Podcasting University and you all have a wonderful rest of the day.